Hi, and welcome to the Kale Houser Leadership Secrets podcast. Today we are going to talk about Sir Ernest Shackleton and his Antarctic expedition. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Kale Houser Leadership Secrets podcast. I am Kale Houser. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you are listening to this in recent times or soon after it was published, you may be aware that recently Antarctic explorers, modern day Antarctic explorers, have discovered the sunken remains of Sir Ernest Shackleton's Antarctic ship called the Endurance. It was from an expedition in 1915. If you have not heard of this, I cannot encourage you enough to go and read up on this. There's a book out. It was published in 2014, I believe, by Alfred Lansing, Lansing, called The Endurance, or actually called Endurance, I think, is just Endurance, detailing and chronicling Shackleton's adventures and his Antarctic expedition. It is a fascinating book, especially if you are at all interested in history and interested in exploration and just kind of the mettle of early explorers in our world, right? They had nowhere near the technological advances and technology that we have today to do these types of things. On a side note, besides that, the leadership example exhibited by Shackleton during this voyage is second to none. There are some that consider Shackleton literally the premier example of what leadership is and ought to be in all of history, right? In all of history. So we're talking Napoleon and Genghis Khan and, all these great people throughout history. And Shackleton, as far as his leadership, is right up with them. Now, that is certainly arguable. That is subjective to all kinds of different variables. And sure, we can sit and talk and argue back and forth about different validity points as much as we want. But regardless, Shackleton, there can be no doubt that he is certainly one of the greatest leaders that has come out of at least then's modern age. So let me give you just a little bit of background, right? So Ernest Shackleton, British explorer, he had a great desire to kind of see, then the uncharted world and get to the actual South Pole. I believe, if I remember correctly, and it's been a little bit since I've read the book, but if I believe he actually came close to the South Pole on a previous expedition, but didn't quite get there for some reason or another. I don't remember exactly what. But I want you to I want to walk you through what makes Shackleton one of the premier leaders in history, and certainly somebody that we can learn from as we go about our own leadership journey and we study other people to see what worked and what didn't work, where failures occurred, where confusion occurred, and things of that nature. So one, Shackleton as a man, in the early 1900s, turn of the century, lots of things happening in the world, and certainly over in Europe and Britain, in England. So he was inspired to take the journey. Something about his nature, whether it be him as a young man, he enjoyed, just exploring his local surroundings, and that eventually went further and further and expanded out into the world at large. So something, within him dwelled that, right? And we see that in ourselves, like something is calling you to be a leader. Maybe you were thrust into this position as a leader in your organization. Maybe it's just by pure natural selection of no one else was left standing, so you are there with the reins. But to a degree, we each are called to be a leader, to take that responsibility and that mantle of taking charge and being in charge and responsible for other people and their livelihood and their well-being and all those things that we can get into. And Shackleton certainly had that, right? As well as just wanting to get out and explore, for whether they be selfish reasons or national pride, scientific reasons. I'm sure he had many different reasons for wanting to do it. But secondly, he took action and he convinced people to finance it, because I don't remember that he was himself independently wealthy, that he's just like, oh, I'm just going to spend $1 million of my own money and go create this expedition. No, he had to actually go out and convince people through his own merit that this was a valid thing worth investing in their resources. And then behind that, sir, you got the money, now what? You can't do it by yourself. So he convinced 27 other crew members, all the way from his navigator to the medical officer to, all the way down to the lowest, I don't know what you would call, what's the lowest ranking person on a ship? Is that a boatswain? I'm not a Navy guy, so I'm not familiar with the terms, but you get what the guy that swabs the decks. You get what I mean. The person that's paid the least. Probably the wages were pretty pitiful for going on a multi-month, even over a year-long, 2-year-long journey to the other side of the world that hadn't really been properly mapped. No one really knew the exact dangers and the risks, and they kind of also knew that their ability to withstand that was mediocre at best, I would say. So he was able to convince all 27 of those people to do that. And it wasn't like he said, or found these people of either you're going to jail or you're joining this expedition, right? It was more like, hey, I'm going to pay you this wage. I promise you potentially fame when we get back as being a part of this crew. But no guarantee. You could die, right? You could never come back and see your family. You could never set foot on English shore again. You don't know. And then, of course, the actual journey itself, sailing across the globe. No small feat at that time without modern GPS, certainly no GPS or anything of that nature, no autopilots. Now, once they got there, it was a several-month journey to get from England over and down into South America and do their resupplies and all that kind of stuff and waiting for weather. And they did finally make it to Antarctica, right? And that in and of itself wasn't such a huge feat. That had certainly been happening at that time, and various whaling expeditions had been to Antarctica and things of that nature. But once they got there, so the emergency set in. Their ship got stuck in ice. If you're not familiar with this story, just a small background. Their ship got just completely, firmly stuck in ice, and there was nothing they could do about it. They tried chipping it out, and there was essentially, it was toast, and they quickly realized that. So Shackleton was able to take these crew through that initial emergency situation where it kind of dawned on them, like, we are stuck in Antarctica on this ice shelf. And it's not like they were even on land proper. They were stuck in an ice shelf that had formed around them. So they couldn't even necessarily walk to get to land. Not that there was clear land at that time. So he led them through that. And then essentially it became an organizational effort at that point, right? So of survival, certainly chief and foremost. And then, carrying out as much with the intention of getting rescued and getting home eventually, their scientific efforts, but really taking the people, the day-to-day, these 27 personalities of various reasons for being there, whether it be financial or fame or anything else like that, or just, a guy that wanted a job or to get away from England for adventure. He took all these personalities through what I consider one of the most extreme environments on the planet, right? You've got certainly the extreme of the Sahara Desert on one hand, and this is the opposite of that. You've got the extreme of the frozen tundra, the frozen ice shelf at the South Pole. And that cannot be underestimated by any stretch. But eventually, as a spoiler, if you haven't read it or if you don't know where this is going, and you kind of should, eventually they were able to rescue themselves under Shackleton's leadership and his command. They were able to move off of the ice shelf by traveling across the ice shelf. They kind of kept their whaling boats, and then they were eventually able to get to, I think it was Elephant Island, which was a popular kind of landing spot, but then nobody came to rescue them there. So then they had to take these little, I want to say like 25, 26 foot whaling dinghies, really is what they were, and sail from this small tiny island in the South Antarctic Ocean all the way up to the south tip of South America to these whaling stations, right? And even that in and of itself is amazing to read about. You absolutely should read this book so you can get the history of this and what these men went through to do it, while leaving a large chunk of their people behind on Elephant Island and hoping that, hey, these guys, if they sink or they get wrecked or anything like that, we're toast. They took our last boats. But eventually, spoiler, they did get to the whaling station, and then Shackleton was able to organize these whalers and these communities that were essentially cut off from the world for all intents and purpose, to go down and rescue this scientific expedition from Elephant Island, and that all happened. Shackleton made it happen. did not lose, whether by famine, by cold, by accident, a single member of his crew, 27 different men, all made it back alive. Now, they were gone for certainly much longer than they anticipated. I believe it was like almost 2 years in total between leaving England and being rescued, which is pretty incredible that they were able to survive, on seal meat and penguins and things of that nature. I will say, though, and judge him for what it is, but none of the dogs made it. None of the sled dogs that they had with them made it back. So maybe that's the ding in his leadership, that they weren't able to save their furry friends. But, hey, when it comes down to it, I guess you choose not to starve versus keeping your Fido around. And the qualities that were required of a person, and certainly don't underestimate that was a different era. The early 1900s and what people went through as part of just daily life. They didn't have any of our conveniences that we have today. There were no Uber Eats. There were no fast grocery stores or mass food processing plants where you could just go down and buy your bag of cereal or anything like that, right? It was still fairly an agricultural society, moving towards certainly the modern industrial age and things of that nature. But the mettle of person that is required to bring 27 people back from such an extreme situation as being stranded and shipwrecked in the Antarctic is amazing to me to think about, and the qualities that it would take for a person to achieve that. Certainly steadfastness, right? Conviction, clarity of expectation, right? The ability to communicate clearly with his people, the ability to connect with his guys, because you can bet there is a certain level in those situations, because they had, any ship has kind of a almost military type hierarchy where there's the captain of the ship and there's the ultimate authority, and then you've got your underlings underneath that. But the ability to move past that, right? Because people, especially underlings, will only follow so far, and that respect for rank only goes so far until it's tested, beyond normal human condition to endure. There has to be something that creates that more than, I'm going to follow you just because you're my captain, right? I'm going to follow you because I believe in you. I'm going to follow you because I believe you are the best person to do that. So that cannot be underestimated. So that quality of being able to inspire his crew that, don't give up hope, to keep that hope. Like, yes, it's hard. This sucks, and it's gonna probably get worse, but I promise you, by hell or high water, we're gonna get out of this, and we're gonna do everything we can to bring everyone back home. Okay, and he did it. That's what's amazing, and being able to read through the book and see those incremental steps of proving himself further and further and further beyond just the grand master of this expedition as being his idea and his goal for the scientific community. He turned it into really an example of leadership under extreme situations, certainly, and that creates in and of itself usually a tighter bond of people. They'll come together, right? But not necessarily. If you've got the wrong person, people don't come together under extreme circumstances and pressure. A lot of times they break apart, and it takes that strong leader to bring them together. So I want to encourage you, if you're facing your own kind of endurance situation, your own Shackletons expedition to where it feels that your ship is going down, or you're watching your ship go down, and you've got people around you that are relying on you as the leader, on the business owner to right the ship, to get it on the right direction, look at yourself and look at those qualities that it takes. You have to be confident in yourself. You have to have clarity of conviction. You have to be able to communicate with your people those expectations. You have to provide that hope that they can cling to. And then really you have to inspire. That's ultimately what it comes down to. You have to be able to inspire your people around you to want to be there, to want to do the work, to want to invest themselves and their energy and resources into your business, whatever that may be, right? And that could be something as simple as, the local pizzeria. And I'm going to probably use that a lot because it is such a relatable experience. Like, we all have local pizzerias in our towns, no matter where you're at in the United States, that we can kind of relate to, of that business structure. Okay, and then all the way up to the corporate. And really encourage you as the leader, whether you be a middle manager, business owner, CEO, how you can become a more confident leader, become more connected to your teams. So if you're not dealing with it right now, when those situations come and you've got the in the middle of the Antarctic kind of scenario happening to you, and then ultimately how you can inspire your teams to follow you. and succeed. That's what it's all about, right? To be productive and succeed and grow. So I hope you, again, it's called The Endurance, or Endurance by Alfred Lansing. It was written in 2004. It's about Sir Ernest Shackleton's Antarctic expedition. They just found his ship in pristine condition after, I think, 106 years at the bottom of the Antarctic Ocean. There's going to be some phenomenal things coming out of it. I'm sure National Geographic will do a special on it in the coming year or so. Take the time to read the book, especially if you're interested in leadership. Analyze it, see what Shackleton did, what he didn't do, read between the lines, and see how that can apply to your life. Hey, I appreciate you so much hanging out with me today. I hope you're having a fantastic day and afternoon, no matter where you are at in the world. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.